Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Rabia Akhtar. I'm Director, Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research at University of Lahore. And we're really pleased to have with us Dr. Syed Mohammad Ali, who actually is in Lahore. But since our campus is closed, we were hoping to host him at the campus. But we decided, to benefit from his wisdom and do a Zoom session with him. So with this, let me first introduce our guest today, and who'll be speaking about the trajectory of Pak-U.S. relations and what is it, where are we heading, what are some of the challenges and opportunities therein. Dr. Syed Mohammad Ali teaches anthropology, international affairs, and international development graduate courses at American, Georgetown, and Johns Hopkins Universities in US. He's a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute at Washington, D.C., and he writes weekly op-eds for Express Tribune in Pakistan. With this, over to you, Dr. Ali, and we would like you to share with us your perspective of the current status of the relationship and, where are we heading? What are some of the challenges in the bilaterals between Pakistan and US that needs a reset? So over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the invite, and it's a pleasure to talk about these things. So I do come at this understanding of the bilateral relationship from a multidisciplinary approach, and in the last three or so years, one has been being a recent sort of resident in Washington, D.C., one has had a first-hand experience of interacting with people who have in the past served in government, and interacting with sort of academics and analysts who look at this bilateral relationship. And I think before we get into the issues, it might be of interest, to the faculty and students who might hear this and have an interest in the bilateral relationship, to sort of see how how people who are not government, right, but engage in policy making, view this relationship, to look at the sort of divergence of views, and to set nationalism aside, because sometimes, which is hard to do, because of course, at the end of the day, you have nation states, and they are pursuing their national interests, even when they are framed, within idealistic or other forms, other formulations. So, I think this is sort of known history, right, that the US-Pakistan relationship, for good or bad, has a long history. Going back to, the advent of the Cold War, and we took certain policy decisions in terms of alignment, going back to SEATO and CENTO. And then as a result of those alliances, started seeing military aid and other forms of sort of financial assistance being provided, to Pakistan. One can even think back to the history of the World Bank and the Indus Water Treaty, etc., right? The Green Revolution. So the interaction has been varied over these past 7 decades. And for compulsions on both sides, we can sort of debate who went to whom, right? But in the 80s, we saw a tightening embrace for mutual benefit, or because of mutual concern, with the Afghan Jihad and its aftermath. And subsequent to that, even earlier there were disappointments, be it the 1971 breakup of Pakistan, the 1965, a war with India, and growing American concern about Pakistani nuclear ambitions. But in the 1990s, I mean, we saw increasing attempts to admonish Pakistan and apply sanctions and pressures on it. And then, of course, post 9/11, we see a kind of a U-turn, if you will, and trying to contend with the use of religiously inspired militancy and from the American lens now. So I keep switching, my perspectives. But we started seeing a lot of turbulence, right? I mean, Pakistan had its own, list of grievances, and America, accused Pakistan of duplicity. Pakistan felt it was being arm twisted, and the 20-year intervention in Afghanistan, and we are now, currently we are in a situation where we are now contending with that legacy and thinking about what should happen next. So I entered, into besides being a student of history and international relations, I entered into the policy world when a former Pakistani ambassador to the U.S. underwrote, an attempt to try and reset relations between Pakistan and the U.S. And this was happening on the heels of an earlier attempt, which was the prescriptions of which were much more punitive. Because, I mean, and here I refer to, a think tank, the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., which was really asking, at the start of the Trump administration, saying that there needs to be a harder line towards Pakistan, and, Pakistan is running with the hound, chasing the hare and running with the hound, etc., like this kind of duplicity. And there's need for the U.S. to to have a much more focused and, if needed, punitive approach to solicit Pakistan's cooperation in Afghanistan and to back off from supporting the Taliban. So subsequent to that, I mean, what we also tried to do was to bring together, and this is a formula in Washington, D.C., where I, worked with a seasoned senior Pakistan watcher, someone who is a professor emeritus of political science, but had also worked in the State Department and has a realist perspective on international relations, and has been a Pakistan and Afghanistan watcher. So I worked with him, and we got together a group of over a dozen people. And, we collated their views. We asked them a series of questions about the bilateral relationship, and collated the views of former senior government officials who have dealt with Pakistan, academics, people from the bank, with an economic lens, people from the think tank community in Washington, D.C. And, by the end of it, it was sort of like herding cats. But, by the end of it, we got 12 of them to sign on to a policy paper, which carries a certain amount of weight because it reflected the joint thinking of a dozen or so Pakistan watchers. And, then we circulated that to policymakers in America. So this was, and basically the idea was, it was calling for a reset of the bilateral relationship, acknowledging the turbulence, acknowledging the grievances on both sides, and acknowledging the reality of, this being an important relationship. For Pakistan, America still being the largest export market, for instance. The fact that if Pakistan does not engage with the US, then it does. Then there might be a compulsion to put more of its eggs into the China basket, right? Which is again then on the flip side a concern for the US as well. And the fact that Pakistan is a nuclear armed state, which is always a cause of concern, in the US, and yet the US has on the one hand, hyphenated over the past 20 years its relationship with Pakistan and tied it to Afghanistan, right? Which has been perceived within Pakistan with a certain amount of disgruntlement and seen as a bit of a turn down, a dialing down of the bilateral relationship, and a kind of insensitivity to Pakistan's regional concerns. And on the other side, there's always, this kind of this demand to do more and to do more, in more earnest, a more earnest Pakistani approach to address American concerns in Afghanistan. So acknowledging these issues, we still, what we argued for was a realistic, mutually beneficial relationship, right? So that's real politics for you, because it's not about besides the rhetoric of helping spread democracy and this, that, the other, at the end of the day, nation states cooperate because it's in their mutual interest. So trying to get away from transactional interactions and trying to sort of again reimagine a realistic, broader, more stable approach to the bilateral relationship. And given sort of the current realities of our modern fragile world, including climate change and all those issues. So we put that policy paper out, and this was, of course, it was in early 2020, so it was before the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. And then we felt that, that was, yes, there were, some Pakistani American sort of perspectives in there as well. And we tried to have a balanced approach, but ultimately that was a paper that was emerging from Washington, DC. So then we tried to replicate that model here in Islamabad as well, engaging with a Pakistani think tank and getting a dozen or so Pakistani, Pakistani intelligentsia, academics, people in government, in the military, and Dr. Rabia Akhtar was also a part of that effort. And we argued for leveraging Pakistan's former geostrategic location, but sort of thinking of it along giving it a new sort of manifestation and turning it into the geo-economic. And we put out a series of recommendations there, and sort of expressed the desire that Pakistan, yes, has a close relationship with China, but it also desires to continue its engagement with the US. And this is a world of complexity and shifting sands. And subsequent to that, we saw the withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan. We've seen the Taliban come to the fore. We've seen Mullah Khan. We've seen the Haqqanis in senior positions, and all of that has ruffled many feathers in Washington, DC. And on the other side, there's the engagement of Pakistan and China, which is another issue of concern. The tightening embrace of India by the United States under the Modi government, realpolitik again, I mean, we can talk about it in terms of democracy and or the lack thereof. But yet, we do still see this attempt to, use India, and try to curb the influence of China, using this kind of, trying to bolster Indian capacity to do so. And we had argued, if you remember, in the work that we did from Islamabad, that, I mean, that is this a kind of an adversarial way to balance China. A more pleasant, way of doing that is also because the Biden administration has come up with the 3 C's of, of engaging with China, right? So it's competition, collaboration, and conflict. So, rather than having a conflictual engagement, thinking of Pakistan as an arena for cooperation or coexistence and collaboration, right? So we so far have not seen much of that happen. And I mean, that's an issue that currently I'm trying to research. But I think that is, where we are. And, the most recent sort of, event where we saw, again, a rupture was Pakistan refusing to participate in the Summit of Democracy, right? And earlier, I mean, it was surprising when there was a climate summit where, where we had other leaders, of countries which are facing the brunt of climate change or are major emitters being invited, and Pakistan being amongst those hotspots was not given the same attention. So and there's still FATF is still around. Pakistan is still heavily dependent on the IMF and the World Bank. And, we have the economic challenges in Pakistan. The US is kind of also struggling with the situation in Afghanistan, trying to find a balance between providing some semblance of support while not wanting to acknowledge the Afghan, the Taliban government or Taliban setup in Afghanistan, and the security challenges that poses to the region and beyond. So this is, this is the lay of the land, if you will, and now, we can sort of start unpeeling whatever issues you wish.
All right, this is great. I think this does give us an overview, and thank you so much for your work. I do remember, being engaged in it, and as to how, sort of those discussions gave us a clarity on convergences and, divergences between Pakistan and US, and as to what is it that Pakistan, if it wasn't supposed to be a transactional relationship, then what is it that Pakistan can offer the US by creating space and, find a way forward and reset its terms of engagement. So we are joined today by some of the faculty members of the School of Integrated Social Sciences, some researchers from SISS, and also some of our PhD scholars. So I will open the floor. If you have a question, can you please raise your hand so that I can then invite you to ask the question from our guest. All right, so Saptan and then Ali, will take both your questions, and I'll let Dr. Ali answer. Over to you, Saptan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabia Akhtar. And thank you so much, Dr. Syed Ali, for giving us time. I thoroughly enjoyed your report, especially your commentary on social and political issues. It is that particular segment on which I would like to make a comment, and then I would like to ask you questions there. Sir, we know that, Taliban government is in control in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is one of the factors that determines Pak-U.S. relation. It's been the constant trend since 40 years, at least since the Carter administration. Sir, now when the West and the regional players are hopeful that, with the Taliban government, we are hoping that we may have an inclusive policy where we can develop a common ground where China can also play a role through CPEC and US can also serve its Central Asian interests. So at this time, I would like to reflect on your commentary, sir, that you said that, if it is for geopolitics, then it is going to be a problem because there's so much rivalry in South Asia. Sir, there is a group here in Pakistan who do not consider Tapi gas pipeline to be in favor of Pakistan's strategic interest here. And we know that thoroughly since past, Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline has always been an alternative to this Tapi gas pipeline because they say that Gilgamesh gas, deposits are going to be really, really costly for Pakistan compared to what Iran can offer us. And we simultaneously know that, US relations with Iran are not good. It's always waxing and waning because of their ideological fervor in the region. Sir, how do you see the relationships, in between Pakistan, Iran, and especially in relation to the development of this region when we know that behind Tapi, it is Asian Development Bank, which serves the purpose of the world order that is not in line with the interest of the Muslim world, and as some of our journals sees here, and some of those people who want to have inclusiveness among the Muslim world, who is already, deteriorating because of the war on terrorism. So in that context, I would like to reflect, on this issue. And I would really like to, have a commentary on you, as you've said that, US can also participate in CPEC. You've, made a recommendation. Some of their companies can, also contribute in CPEC. So there is a very complex situation right now. 9.5 billion funds have always been, frozen by the US, and they are not releasing it. How it is for, Taliban that they would, sort out these sort of problems in the region, sir. I would really want your comments on that. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Saptan. I think Dr. Ali, why don't you take this question and then move to the next ones?
Well, I'm not an energy expert, but when it comes to IPI, India pulled out quite a while ago. The sanctions on Iran. The Iran relationship is thorny, and the Biden administration is, thinking of re-engaging Iran, and Iran wants to make sure that, if there's, again, a Republican government or, they want to try and bulletproof the deal, right? So, till that happens, I don't know, I don't see many chances of IPI in its original formulation sort of, coming to the fore. Now, when it comes to the Muslim world, I think that, we also have to realize that the Muslim world is not a homogeneous block. Because if we're thinking Iran, and Saudi, there we start seeing, dichotomies, to say the least. So and yet being a development anthropologist by training, I understand what you're saying about, the Asian Development Bank and the way sort of, this market-led approach to development, comes to the fore. And there are sort of, China's made a bid, right, for influence also in Iran, like, with Char Bahar, and then China's, that's still, I think China's attempt to, gain a foothold in Iran is also, to a certain extent, constrained by sort of the international sanctions. There are these multiple layers, I think that that need to be sort of kept in mind on the one hand, and I think that I think you also reference sort of CPEC and the broadening of CPEC, and if it starts coming, I think that there's been a bit of a slowdown with CPEC, although, from how it's being viewed from afar. And, when it comes to linking CPEC to other regional countries, including Afghanistan, I think the sort of, the camel hasn't sat yet. Let's see, because the situation in Afghanistan is still quite fluid. So I don't know if China is going to be, jumping into broadening, and linking, CPEC and BRI and into Afghanistan. At least in the immediate future. I mean, so far, China has also provided humanitarian support. And earlier, I mean, yes, there are natural resources in Afghanistan, but China hasn't had a very good experience working with the Ashraf Ghani government in the past. And right now, I mean, lest we see sort of more stability and international recognition of the Taliban, I don't know how the energy and other sort of precious minerals. I mean, yes, there's need for that, regional integration, and there's great potential, economic potential there. But I mean, given the tenuous situation with Iran, given the tenuous situation in Afghanistan, I don't know, it's hard to predict right now. I mean, in terms of regional integration, what's going to happen. I mean, the discussion on these energy corridors has been ongoing since, the 1990s. And the progress has been excruciatingly slow. So I'll stop there, since really, energy is not my forte. But I mean, I think that some of these geopolitical issues do come into play.
Sure. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ali Jafri.
Thank you for a very succinct overview of Pak-U.S. relations. I would take you back to your 2020 report that you co-authored with Marvin. And there, one of the recommendations in the security section was as to how the US can, not only play the role of a crisis manager, but also bring India and Pakistan together. Now, the trajectory and nature of Indo-US relations that has evolved. The US is not even trying to waive CAATSA sanctions, as evidenced by India's deployment of the S-400 batteries on the border with Punjab. So as I see it, from a credible crisis manager, the US is partly turning out to be a crisis propellant, if I were to put it bluntly. So now, in light of developments since you wrote that report, how do you look at that crisis management recommendation? And so when we youngsters write for American publications like Stimson, Atlantic, and other places, first of all, we find it hard to put across our point. The next problem that we face is that, unfortunately, we are expected to write something that the Americans want us to write. So it takes us a lot of, it pains us a lot, but we then have to fight our own ground, and we have to hold our own ground to not write what they want us to write, because the perceptions are so much lopsided against Pakistan. So what is your recommendation for students sitting here who want to play a crucial role in changing the nature and direction of the intellectual discourse on Pak-U.S. relations, especially in the foreign media and international publications? Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Over to you.
Well, I mean, that's a tough one, but that's why when we say realpolitik, I mean, you have to take into account that their power dynamics are already in play. And but I think that we sort of, when we thinking realpolitik, then we also have to put aside our own nationalistic view, right? Because then you have to be objective from all sides, right? And ultimately, I think that while in these consensus papers, it was more difficult to bring one's own voice out, but ultimately it's about fine-tuning and calibrating, your own perspective. And I mean, if it's unique enough, I mean, it's not guaranteed publication, but I mean, if it's unique enough and substantiated enough, there are chances of it seeing the light of day. So, I mean, that being said, I mean, I think revisiting our recommendations, from what I remember, I think we realized that, the US has, and this was not only me, I mean, this was the voice of a dozen people sitting in Washington, D.C., who felt that while, in the past, there was a de facto hyphenation between India and Pakistan, and, in the last 20 years, India has managed to break that hyphenation, right? And particularly post 9/11, in fact, then the US hyphenated Afghanistan and Pakistan and decided to pursue a distinct relationship with India. Now, when it comes to realpolitik, but it didn't do so with Pakistan, and Pakistan might be desiring that, but there is perhaps not enough appetite in the US to do that. Right. And people are still arguing that, that is the way to go, because Pakistan is a large economy. It is in a particular location, and it would serve American interests well to think of Pakistan beyond a narrow transactional, agenda. So India has, and I mean, it's invested, at multiple levels in its relationship with the US, and the US also finds working with India useful. So, so in the law, I mean, now the US has been engaging with India on its own terms, and not only to balance China, but also, as in terms of investment in the IT sector, etc. So we didn't think that it would be feasible for Pakistan to ask the US to help, because, in the past, with lackluster intention, or, without really trying to apply pressure and allocate sufficient resources, the Kashmir issue hadn't been resolved, right? And on the other side, India has been pushing hard, right? I mean, through prestigious think tanks as well, because they have endowed chairs there, arguing that the US should not interfere, right, on the Kashmir issue. Let Pakistan and India sort it out. And what we were, in fact, saying was that, the US had sort of, backed off, and I don't see the US really playing a more proactive role in that regard. But what it was doing was, it was a crisis manager. When push came to shove, and in fact, India and China used to, in the past, try and bring the crisis back from the brink. And what we were saying was that as there's, I think this is still true, that as the animosity between the two is growing, they are, not necessarily on, although for China, I mean, if God forbid there's a nuclear conflict, I mean, China's right next door. I mean, it'll be a global catastrophe. I mean, adding to all the pollution and everything else that's happening to the climate. So, I mean, that would be a catastrophe of global proportions. I mean, if it were to go there, and it hasn't yet, right? I mean, we've seen deterrence despite, serious tension. So I don't know the extent to which we, I mean, in the US, it seems like they need to referee, right? And in China and the US were the ones who were taking both these countries back from the brink. Whereas, we've seen in the recent past that, there is nuance, when it comes to sort of, the nuclear deterrence situation within the Indian subcontinent as well. But yes, I mean, and this is the fear that, I mean, if we see, I mean, there were some people who after the Sino-Indian skirmish last year were arguing that, I mean, now this is the right time to sort of, work with India to perhaps take the contestation, like, beyond the sort of Indo-Pacific and perhaps into the, Himalayan sort of, continental shelf. And I don't even know how practical that is. I mean, given how hard it is for Pakistan and India to maintain troops in Siachen. But there is this fear that, if there is this kind of, Cold War 2.0, then who's going to referee this situation? So what we were arguing for was that, at least when it comes to crisis management, there needs to be a playbook for international actors who in the past used to collaborate, and they should not worsen the situation. But we have seen, this kind of, the India-Pakistan acrimony being aggravated, right? And even with nuclear deterrence, there is this kind of four-way competition, right? So China is looking at the US, India is looking at China, Pakistan is looking at India, right? And we can, and there are caveats within that, like tacticals and whatnot. Again, not my area of expertise. But I think the contention was that, even if the US cannot, besides, it can talk about those issues, right? Like perhaps privately, but there hasn't been, that intention of revisionism, right? Really sitting and, with India and Pakistan, and India has been very resistant to that idea. And then it's difficult for a third party to come in if, one of the sides doesn't want that interference. So I don't see that as being practical. Even a few years, in the past or anytime in the near future either.
All right, that's great. Over to you, Hassan Fariduddin. Please open your video.
All right, man. Thank you. I'm not sure if my internet is stable enough to sustain the video, but okay, I'll try. So first of all, it's a pleasure to hear from you today, Mr. Syed Ali. So sir, I wanted to ask that over the past 2 decades, the landscape of Pak-U.S. relations, in that landscape, the U.S. policymakers or the U.S. officials, they were giving policy responses to deal with Pakistan. But those policy responses were excessively and narrowly focused on a singular issue, the war on terrorism. Hence, Pak-U.S. relationship became some sort of a unicellular organism of jihad so now, as the war on terror has subsided for the time being, at least for the time being, it has subsided. So what do you think US will respond to Pakistan in the near future as the situation in Afghanistan stabilizes, or it explodes somehow in the face of this US-Afghanistan deal? So how do you see the situation in the near future?
Thank you, Hassan. Over to you, Doctor.
That's also.
It's still, it's still up in the air. Are we going to see managed chaos? Some cynics, skeptics, think that might be the best case scenario that, that will unfold in Afghanistan. And it's tricky, right? With the Taliban having surprisingly swept to power so easily, if they want contenders, to their influence, it's not to say that there are no contenders. And here I'm not thinking about, the former Northern Alliance, but also ISK, right? Because, there does seem to be this, sort of, if you look at the caretaker setup, primarily Pashtun, primarily male, some semblance of other ethnicities, but, fairly conservative and hardline. And it seems that they are also playing to the local audience, because now the Taliban, if you look at sort of social media by ISK, talking about the Taliban being sellouts to the US and being traitors and, lacking piety. So, there is this fear of attrition also in Afghanistan, with the Taliban regime, with the Taliban setup, government, whatever label we want to give to them for now. So they, it's not like the security challenges have dissipated. Right, and and yet, and of course, I mean that has varied implications. I mean, with Islam, ISK and its affiliates, I mean, all the way into the Middle East, across the border in Pakistan, right? And not everyone is on the same page, because while Islamic State is a global jihadi outfit, and I mean, we can see almost everyone agree, be it India, be it Afghanistan, be it Pakistan, be it the US, be it China, right? For everyone, be it Bangladesh, right? I mean, Sri Lanka, I mean, everyone agrees that the IS is undesirable, right? That non-state actor is undesirable, to see it grow and gain more influence. But then, with the other non-state actors, and their alleged, proxy affiliations with other countries, it starts getting complicated. So just recently, the ETIM, the Eastern Turkmenistan Islamic Movement, right, was Pompeo, one of his last acts. He said there's been no evidence of them for a decade, so they don't need to be on the terrorist list. Now, for China, that is a group of major concern, right? And then layered onto that with political rhetoric and morality, how states use morality as a cudgel to go after each other, right? And it's not to say that Pakistan doesn't do that, right? And the US does that, and India does that, and China does that, right? So with these contentions, with this finger pointing, we haven't yet seen, even where the sort of, we can see a convergence between regional actors and beyond, we haven't seen a focused approach to try and sort of, at least not provide space to a non-state actor that everyone thinks is undesirable. So, and we've seen that play out in the recent attacks in Pakistan. I mean, China is concerned, but then that's, I mean, it's this first, let's try and address other issues and then, get to this issue. So let's see, I mean, if there is going to be over the horizon counterterrorism, I mean, it's not like Pakistan and the US haven't, cooperated on counterterrorism in the past, but they don't have the list of non-desirable actors. I mean, even in the past, we've had issues with, right? I mean, Pakistan's concerns in Balochistan, India's concerns in Kashmir, America's concerns with Xinjiang. So that's why it's kind of difficult to see sort of everyone coming on the same page, and the security situation hence remains tenuous. So I think it would be premature to think of, in fact, I mean, for the Taliban themselves, I mean, this remains a major challenge. I don't want to over-exaggerate, the threat posed by ISK, but because there are so many other proxies that and if there is managed chaos, then and there is this kind of proxy engagement in Afghanistan, then we can see recurrent turbulence. And Pakistan has experienced, immediately, I mean, while there hasn't been a humanitarian crisis at the borders yet, we've seen some of this, we felt the shocks of, instability already. So let me stop there.
All right, thank you. So Dr. Ali, we are going to collect the 3 questions that are posed. So if you want to make note, I can also make note of these questions for you. Over to you, Dr. Shahzad.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohammad Ali, for
thank you so much, Dr. Rabia, for providing me the opportunity to attend this Zoom webinar.
It was sorry, Dr. Ashfaq, it's Dr. Shahzad first, and then Adila, and then yourself. That's the order.
Sorry.
Not a problem.
Sorry.
Not a problem. Ji, Dr. Shahzad, over you.
Yeah, yeah, again, thanks for a very interesting talk. My question is related with prevailing thinking in American policymaking circles and academia. Since Professor Mohammad Ali is in US, and I'm sure that he got opportunity to interact with academia and policymakers and officials, American officials. Coming to my question, I want to ask how far there is a realization in American academia and American official circles that they need to consistently engage Pakistan to achieve their goals, particularly related with terrorism, because American withdrawal from Afghanistan doesn't mean that terrorist threat for Americans is over. So how far they realize that instead of ditching Pakistan because there is a prevailing opinion in Pakistan that America ditch Pakistan when they achieve their objectives. And I think still it's very much valid. So how do you think how they rate Pakistan, how far this is necessary to achieve their American goals in Afghanistan or against terrorism? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shahzad. Adila, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Adila, and I'm PhD scholar at the School of Integrated Social Science. So thank you very much for the session and very interactive indeed. Sir, my question is very simple yet. I want to ask, what is your reflection about the new approach that can reset the Pakistan-US relationship in a constructive direction in longer terms, like. And sir, my second question is that what is your views as we are talking about setting the terms between Pakistan and America? So can there is a possibility that pacts can be made between Pakistan and US like back in 50s? So there are reasons of failure of that. So is there any possibility? Please, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Adila. Ji, Dr. Ishfaq.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabia, for providing me the opportunity. Sorry for the earlier intrusion. I thought it's my name, so that's why I joined. Sir Ali, my question to you is, if we look at the American history or the history of wars, it has two strategies. One is a direct attack on countries. For example, we have the Iraq War example. And the second strategy is that it first of all, it starts a communication war, like it has waged communication war against Iran. And then the second strategy, the second part of the strategy is that to impose sanctions. And then and third part of the strategy is that it come up with a substitute leadership. If we look at Afghanistan, the direct attack era that has already been gone. Do you think that this is the second strategy which America has launched against Afghanistan? And moreover, if you look at the ISIS, perhaps they are the proxies, and they have liquid cash in their hand, while Taliban, they don't have liquid cash in their hand. So it will be easy for ISIS to recruit people as a foot soldier, and then wage terrorism against US or its allies, and then it will provide opportunity to United States to come again directly and have its bases or its presence in Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Ali.
I think there's nice continuity in the question. So I'll sort of begin with the last one first. And I mean, unfortunately, I think states don't start out wanting to try and create a Frankenstein, if you will, right? But things like managed chaos, unpredictable things happen. So I don't know the extent to which, I mean, nor am I privy to, intelligence, sources. And I mean, the world is a messy place, but, I don't know if if ISIS is an engineered group, and the extent to which it is engineered and controlled with invisible puppet strings. I mean, we have seen horrible things happen in the world, right? And states finger point. I mean, fingers are also pointed at Pakistan, not for ISIS, but, or ISK, but for other groups. But in that, in the vacuum and the sort of the disaster that was Iraq, right? We saw, and the targeting of Al-Qaeda, and then sort of, we saw the emergence of Islamic State. I mean, that's just a reality, right? And given the sort of the insidious nature of the group, right, and its global ambitions, I don't know if nation states, in particular, and particularly insidious for the nation state, right? I don't know if they are seen as a viable option, right, to supplant the Taliban, within the West, right? I mean, even in the intelligence community, but I'm going out on a limb here. But I mean, for someone who looks at it from, without access to intelligence dossiers, I mean, to me, that seems a bit of a stretch. So, and I think now I'll just jump to the first question. And I think I was trying to address that, right, in my earlier comment by saying that while ISIS, Islamic State, Khorasan is a group that everyone can agree to dislike, right, and not want it to grow, including India and China and the US and Pakistan and Iran, right? But yet, I mean, because there isn't consensus on other groups, right? Like, I mean, the BLA and the sort of the groups that have been known to operate in Kashmir and the Xinjiang sort of militancy in Xinjiang, etc. Right, so we are not seeing in the public domain, we are not seeing consensus, right? And as a result of that, I mean, we might still see, less there is acknowledgement of the Taliban and the Taliban themselves. I mean, if you look at, what they've been doing recently, right? I mean, with sort of, the new restrictions being sort of, announced on sort of, the travel of women, etc. Right? Like they are sort of, trying to be conservative and prevent sort of, some of their sympathizers joining hardliners. So it's a very tricky situation, and there are opportunities, and people are arguing for for more constructive engagement, like trying to reimagine the earlier ROZ, the Reconstruction Opportunity Zone, that never came into being, where there would be joint economic sort of collaboration between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it would serve the American market, right? So kind of a win-win-win. And similarly, there are other ways, and regional economic integration is one prospect. It's not to say that regional economic integration necessarily, becomes a win for everyone, because even therein, there are issues of elite capture. So when the US talks about, China and its role in Pakistan and predatory lending, I mean, just because we have Pepsi and Coca-Cola in Pakistan doesn't make Pakistan into a healthy and fit country, right? I mean, there's wealth to trickle down is a major challenge in its own right. So just because you have economic cooperation doesn't mean problems solved. So I mean, there are those challenges to think through. There is the security challenge to think through. And I certainly don't, I mean, I don't think that we've seen in the past, I mean, another reimagining of the CETO type of an alliance. I mean, if we have some kind of an alliance which is, either bit bilateral or involves other regional countries, it would have to be on counterterrorism, right? And there could be a broadening of the bilateral relationship, but I mean, if we've seen anything like CETO or CENTO, it's the Quad, right, which does not involve Pakistan, which, so we've seen kind of a, another kind of an alliance coming to the fore. So I hope I've addressed at least some elements of all three questions.
No, absolutely, you did. I'd like to wrap up our session. I'm cognizant of your time demands as well. You made a reference about, chairs and chairs at various universities held by Indian Americans, funded by rich Indians, their influence in the, at the Hill, as well as very strong lobbying. Pakistan does not have that kind of space in DC or presence in think tanks or even in universities, not only in the US, but around the globe. Our chairs are empty at the universities. They haven't been filled. And it is not for the lack of competent people in Pakistan. So how do you suggest, since you interact with the universities and the think tanks as well in DC, and you know about the Indian influence and their space, what would you suggest to Pakistani policymakers, for example, who are at the helm of affairs and actually can exact this change? Is it a change in mindset that needs to come? Is it lack of resources? Is it lack of vision? Do we not know what influence in today's world means? So what is it that we are not doing and we can do to create some space for our voice in DC?
I mean, I'm going to slightly hijack your question. I think some of it also has to do with resources and vision, certainly, right? And I mean, like, why? I mean, if there's a Tata chair, I mean, there's enough sort of, I mean, probably not at that level, and there is some collaboration, right? I mean, so sort of wealthy philanthropic efforts have led to collaborations like between LUMS and Hopkins, for instance. So there's not an entire absence. I mean, the work we did was also underwritten. I mean, it was temporary, but when one puts that, and it's not that just because you have resources allocated, I mean, you get to do what you want. I mean, but at least it provides you the space. And I mean that just because you throw money, at an institution because they also want to have, organizational integrity. So, I mean, it's creating influence is not that easy, but yes, I mean, some of it possibly has to do with sort of, our comparative size to India, but being in DC, yes, one does feel that there is, there is more attention given to the Indian perspective. But I think so given those constraints, right? I mean, be it lack of vision or resources and population size, I think there's also a need of creativity. And I mean, India in the past and even now, I mean, is playing ball with the US. I mean, I mean, look at Howdy Modi, right? I mean, that kind of an event. Look at the Indian presence in the US or diasporic presence in the US government. But they are also, I mean, even now it's not the non-alignment movement anymore, but they have not stopped, trade with Russia, be it sort of, military exchanges, and that's a sore point for the US. But I think in Pakistan, there is need to rethink the civil-military balance, right? And I mean, when it comes from the outside, it's seen as being intrusive, right? And then that kind of, the inability to really be on the same page, right? To think of institutional balances. So I'm thinking about the Kerry-Logar bill, which was not well received in Pakistan. But the idea there was that, because I mean, the US has been criticized in the past and continues to work with military establishments, I mean, across Africa, across Latin America, even helping some of them come to power, or when they come to power, sustaining them, because they are serving a certain interest. And we've seen that, in the case of our country as well. So, when there are these kind of, disadvantages, I mean, it's coming up with, finding more niches to amplify one's voice, but then it's also trying to see what that voice is that will, be heard, that will want to be heard. I mean, just because you have a shriller and a louder voice doesn't mean that people are going to hear it. And for that, we have to transcend, our own positionality, right? And not think of, the rest of the world sort of revolving around us and seeing no fault in ourselves. And I think that, in India, we one has seen with this amplification of voice also a certain amount of jingoism, jingoistic sort of, India shining, and India is not really shining, right? We've seen the right, although it manifests itself differently, the authoritarianism in India manifests itself differently. And, also in Bangladesh and also in Sri Lanka and in Pakistan. So I think that we can do both. We can think about the message that we want to convey and, then try and find, and allocate from our meager resources, more opportunity to amplify those voices. But I think we have to do homework on both fronts.
Absolutely. It has been such a pleasure listening to you. We've worked together briefly, but it's always a pleasure listening to you comprehensively, in such a short time, covering a lot of ground. So thank you so much for joining us today. And on taking on the questions and answering them in detail as well. I look forward to another opportunity to work with you and hopefully to host you in better times, non-COVID times, post-COVID times, next time you are in Lahore. So on behalf of the School of Integrated Social Sciences at University of Lahore, I take care and have a nice day. Not a problem.
All right. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye.